Welcome back into the Draft Lab. I'm Joel Worth, and this is the IDP Plus Best Ball Show. Today, we are continuing our series with the IDP rankings. We're going over FantasyPros rankings, and this time we're talking about linebackers. With me this week, special guest, my man, Axton Harding. Ax, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Ready to get into some linebackers, the meat of the IDP stuff, the position everybody loves to see. So I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah, it's sexy time with the IDPs. We get to talk about linebackers, everybody's favorite position. So let's get into it. We're going to default off the FantasyPros scoring. So we talked about it last week. Bring that up. There we go. So 1.5 points for solo tackles, 0.75 for assisted, 2 points for tackle for loss, 4 points for a sack, 5 points for an interception, 4 points for a fumble forced, and 4 points for recovery, 6 points for a touchdown, 2 points for safety. So big picture, what do you think about this scoring? Is this typical for the leagues you play in? Is this atypical? What do you think about that?
Honestly, it's pretty close to a lot of the leagues that I'm in. Now, in terms of just best ball, I'm actually more in like more sack heavy leagues. I do a lot of the IDP best balls that the IDP show puts out, so they have the big three scoring. But overall, in like my rostered leagues, it's more. That's kind of what this is more catered to, kind of a more tackle premium league. Just a note off the rip with regard to linebackers, it seems like something I would notice and just take note of when I'm going to draft is obviously tackles for loss being 2 points apiece. So if you can find any linebackers that are getting you 6, 7, 8 plus tackles a week, but also those guys that'll get you 4 or 5 sacks in a year, those guys are rushing the passer. They have more opportunities to get a tackle behind the line. So there's just added points for guys like that. So just something I noticed kind of off the rip. And then obviously interceptions being 5 points, you don't really see a whole lot of that in linebackers, but guys like Fred Warner and stuff could kind of compile some extra points throughout the year. So just a couple little noteworthy things.
Yeah, and speaking of Fred Warner, an interesting guy in that we don't expect a whole lot from Dre Greenlaw this year, so it'll be interesting to see how his role changes in San Francisco now that he's going to have to carry a lot more of that load.
Absolutely.
So let's get into the rankings themselves. So Tier 1, FantasyPros has 3 players in Tier 1. It's Foye Oluokun, no surprise there, Roquan Smith, and Zaire Franklin. It's a pretty skinny Tier 1. Give me your big picture thoughts on that Tier 1. Anybody else you would – I don't – it seems impossible to take anyone out of that because there's only 3 players in the tier. Anybody else you would kick into Tier 1 from Tier 2 or below?
I mean, to be honest, I would almost keep Foye and Roquan in this tier by themselves and bump Zaire out. I know he's been outstanding in terms of just like pure tackle rate. I mean, all the metrics and everything for the last couple of years, he's been great. But I think EJ Speed is going to eat into a little bit more of those tackles than maybe some of us want to admit. And I think maybe we should temper expectations in terms of maybe a Tier 1 linebacker. I think he fits perfectly into a Tier 2 with your TJ Edwards, your Alex Singletons and stuff, kind of like FantasyPros has here. So I just think that Foye being a Triple Crown winner, kind of a linebacker who's kind of led that position in terms of fantasy scoring in the last 3 years, just with pure tackling alone. Him and Roquan Smith is just kind of in another league of his own in just terms of sheer talent. And Roquan hasn't quite produced in terms of fantasy, just mainly because of situation. The last year or two, you've seen Patrick Queen emerge as a better LB2. So Roquan hasn't really had to eat up quite as many tackles, and he's been able to help the team in other areas of the defense. So, but I think this year with Patrick Queen gone and Trenton Simpson now back in, I think Roquan is going to have to slide over and just kind of help this second-year linebacker adjust to the NFL and also just actually get some live reps in this scheme with a lot of great players around him to learn from. So I think he is going to have to make up for some, I guess, shortcomings if you will. I think Trenton Simpson has upside of Patrick Queen, but I think, there's going to be some adjustments. So Foye and Roquan definitely belong up there by themselves, in my opinion. And I don't really see anybody that can really compare because, like I said, the talent and then sheer production from both of these guys in year over year has just been consistent throughout. So like I said, I think this tier simply belongs, although albeit small, I think it just kind of belongs to Foye and Roquan, to be honest.
Okay, so you think it should be even skinnier than they have it?
Yeah, I know. Okay. I know it's kind of like dynasty running back rankings where like CMC kind of has like his own little tier. You know what I mean? You don't really want to like bump him down below the top tier guys because he's always the top producer, but at the same time, age is kind of up there. So it's kind of the same thing, but different little aspects you're kind of taking a look at here.
Yeah, we did a house all IDP startup this year, and I ended up taking Zaire Franklin because I had like six pick or something like that. So I'm going to keep him in tier 1 just because I really need him to be in tier 1. But
he's other than right there outside of it for me.
Yeah.
To me, it's just Roquan and Foye are just kind of like in a league of their own. But like fantasy points are just right there, man. I don't see him taking too much of a dip with EJ Speed. To me, it's just putting them up there with those two seems maybe a little much, but I don't see why he couldn't get another 150 tackle season easy. And, the production ought to continue. So your case could be made. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't want, or if I wanted Roquan to fall to me, but it didn't happen. So before we get to tier 2, let's talk about TrophySmack and their draft boards. It is getting to be draft season. It's going to be time for your home leagues. It's time to get ahead of the game right now with TrophySmack's gorgeous draft boards, complete with player stickers so deep you couldn't possibly need them all. And for the first time, TrophySmack has an IDP expansion pack for all of you like us, defensive nerds who love the IDP. So check out the link we're going to put in the show notes, and get yours today. All right, Axe, let's talk about tier 2. Bobby Okereke, Ernest Jones, TJ Edwards, Fred Warner, we just mentioned, Alex Singleton. Anybody there that you don't think belongs in that tier? Anybody else you'd want to kick up into that tier?
I mean, personally, I think typically in most drafts that I've been in, Alex Singleton probably falls down into that tier 3. I don't know why, because in just terms of, like I said, fantasy production, he's been arguably up there in top 10 the last like 3 or 4 years since he came over to Denver from Philadelphia. So I don't see why he doesn't belong there, in all honesty. If I had my own set of rankings, I'm sure he'd be right around that 9-10 area. Fred Warner probably obviously belongs in this one. More at the top. Okereke gets tons of tackles, and he's guy that can get you past deflections and tackles for loss and sacks and stuff like that. So I like him. And Ernest Jones the same way. All these guys, even TJ Edwards, I think really belong in this tier. There's not really too many that I don't see anybody that I'd bump out. Now, if I were talking about maybe bumping somebody up, I don't know if we want to talk about that, or do we want to wait till we get to tier 3?
Absolutely.
We want to talk about bumping
yep.
Up? Okay.
Go ahead. Who do you want to kick up? I got one guy I want to kick up, so I want to see your thoughts as well.
See, I like Nick Bolton has proved that with a full season, he can be up there. And I think that's a given. I think he obviously with the full season, we don't want to assume an injury. I think Nick Bolton belongs in tier 2, even if it's at the bottom of the tier, just from respect of having proven himself. I think maybe other candidates that could prove to actually push into this tier this year maybe don't necessarily belong there quite yet, but are right there. I think you're looking at Azeez Al-Shaair in a Houston defense who really loves to attack the run and stack the box. I think Azeez Al-Shaair is going to eat in the Houston defense, and then also Levante David, kind of in a similar situation with Roquan Smith, where he's going to have to help whoever the LB2 is. I imagine that's KJ Britt as of right now. But there's not going to quite be I guess, well, Devin White last year was in there, but he was kind of underproducing. So Levante David also had to step in and kind of like Roquan Smith will have to this year, excuse me. He kind of had to make up for the shortcomings. So I think that's going to play a big factor into this year. And even though he's 34 years old, I think Levante David's going to be right up there with Aziz. And you're probably looking at close to 150 or better tackle season and maybe 5 or more sacks, because he's also one of those guys that I mentioned earlier that will rush the passer. He had 4.5 sacks last year, so you can count on, I would argue, about that many, or if not more, in terms of sacks and tackles for loss. So those are just bonus points for me. And like I said, those probably a couple of guys that I'd put more towards the top of this tier that could probably jump into tier 2 if things go right for them. So who would you say in tier 3? Maybe I know I don't want to dive too much into tier 3. Those were just candidates that could like jump up, I guess. Yep. We'll dive more into the actual tier itself in a sec. But do you have anybody?
Yeah, Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton was the guy I was going to say. Yep. Again, I think people are sleeping on him because he was hurt last year. He got nicked up. I think it was today in training camp. It doesn't sound too serious, but I think he's a guy who, when he is healthy, is kind of an elite producer, and I would definitely put him into tier 2 there. So TJ Watt is the number 12 ranked linebacker in Fantasy Pros.
I noticed that.
Is there ever a situation that you would want to start him as a linebacker versus a defensive lineman / edge player?
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on how the draft is falling to me. Like in a draft that's more tackle heavy, I don't mind getting a top tier edge rusher. Now, I'm probably not going to be the first one to grab like a TJ Watt or somebody, but I'll grab like the bottom of that first tier or something like that, just to get that consistency among a position that's maybe more scarce, even just because it doesn't score as many points as like your linebackers and stuff, because I feel linebackers are quite a bit deeper, and I feel more confident in my ability to kind of get some good tackling linebackers in the middle round, so I can kind of shore up my other positions earlier. But I still, obviously, if it's a tackle premium league, I want to get some premier top tier linebackers as well. I just don't really like to over dabble into one or the other unless the scoring's egregious, which really isn't the case here. If you're looking at like 2 points a tackle, then maybe I'll dip more into like the elite linebackers and stuff. But I like to try to keep it even keel and not really go any position. You know what I mean? Like, even if I can get a defensive back, obviously we like to wait on, but if I find a value in a top tier one, I'll grab them. But it's not what we're focusing on here. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach most of my drafts.
Yeah, I agree. I think the flexibility is nice. If you ever run into a case where you get injury issues or something like that in your linebackers, it's always nice to have that flexibility. But it's not something I'm going to go into a draft and say, okay, I'm going to take TJ Watt and he's going to be my starting linebacker. I much prefer to put him at edge because, yeah, like you say, linebackers tend to be higher scoring players than DLs or their edge players. So, right. Agree with you on that one.
League, then maybe I might play him as a linebacker. You know what I mean? If I can load up on some mid-round edge rushers and load up my defensive line slots, then yeah, maybe sliding TJ Watt into a linebacker's position as an edge rusher who's scoring more points wouldn't be a bad idea, or even an IDP flex spot.
Yep. All right, let's take a look at tier 3, and we're looking at the aforementioned Nick Bolton, Bobby Wagner, who's now in Washington, Aziz Al-Shaair, who you mentioned earlier, Levante David, Terrell Bernard, and CJ Mosley. We're going to talk about our breakouts in a second, but anybody else you think should be in tier 3 that we haven't talked about yet in this group?
Oh, somebody that could bump up. Man, that's tough. I think Logan Wilson has the talent to bump up into tier 3, but we haven't seen it yet. And I've always had a hard time taking him where he goes in drafts. So the talent's there, but I don't see it really happening. Honestly, I really like this tier. I don't see, maybe Quincy Williams has another great season and because he's a fun player to watch, kind of always has been, but he's never really been that linebacker that you just really feel confident in and week out. Of course, they'll have you those fun boom weeks, but generally before last year, he wasn't a guy that you really, like I said, you didn't really feel confident in your lineup every week, but you kind of put him out there because that's what you paid for. But with CJ Mosley getting older, maybe that was a reason why Quincy stepped up and produced a little bit more for IDP managers last year. And that could be if that's the case, then I don't see why that couldn't happen this year. The defense is virtually the same in terms of the linebacking core, just a few changes up on the edge, defensive line. But the talent didn't really decrease. It just kind of shifted or pivoted. So I think you can kind of virtually slot in 2023 production to Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley for this year. So I'd say if anybody, probably Quincy might be my candidate to bump up, but I feel comfortable with him in tier 4 right now.
Okay. The one guy I think should probably kick up in that I would kick up into tier 3 and is in tier 4 right now is Robert Spillane of the Raiders. I think that's going to be, we talked about them last week. We're talking about the D line with adding Christian Wilkins to Max Crosby. Hopefully you get the breakout from Tyree Wilson. I think that's going to be a really good defense, and he's going to be the guy man in the middle. I think he's going to be on the field. I think he's going to be a 3-down player. So I think if that defense turns out to be as good as I think it's going to be, then he's a guy who could kind of really kick up his numbers a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, he was kind of one of those that always had the snaps, but never really produced until he got into Vegas. And now now that we all got a good taste of him last year, he's kind of one of those that nothing really changed in Vegas except for better things. The defensive line bulked up. So you're even looking at better funneling for rushing plays for those linebackers, and things would just kind of fall right into his lap. So I don't see why he couldn't repeat last year. And I believe he finished higher than the linebacker 22 that he's ranked here anyways. So yeah, that's a great candidate to kind of bump up a tier.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of like an Alex Anzalone, a guy who, people thought was more of a compiler than an actual really good player, but I think he's a pretty good, and then, eventually kind of the market shifted and kind of realized that he's a pretty good player. I think Spillane's kind of the same kind of guy.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
All right, it's breakout time. Who is your breakout that we haven't talked about yet? Somebody from outside of the top 3 tiers that you think is going to have a breakout season in 2024.
Man, let me just check some rosters here because I like Ivan Pace. I like the news that we've seen with him likely getting the green dot this year. He was kind of one I was worried about with Blake Cashman having had some pretty good at PFF grades after his run in Houston last year. But it's good to see. I know that Minnesota also had a defensive coordinator change, so typically we don't really see more than one good linebacker out of Minnesota, but I think that could possibly change with this defensive coordinator change. So I think maybe both of these guys could be productive, but obviously you want the green dot, the guy that's going to be out there calling plays every down. He's going to be out there 90 or 100% of snaps. And Ivan Pace is, again, one of those guys I mentioned earlier that also rushes the quarterback and is going to get you those tackles for a loss and sack points. So bump him way up from wherever he's at. If he's not in the top 25, then yeah, he absolutely belongs up there. Just for one example, I guess. Let's see. EJ Speed would be another one that I kind of mentioned earlier. He's I don't even know where he would be ranked in the Fantasy Pros, but I'm sure it's way down there. He's
at the top of tier 5.
Tier 5. Okay, so he just missed this. So he's somebody that I think if he can continue his stretch to the end of last season, he was one of those guys that every time that he would come in and get a full-time role, he would produce every time, kind of like Isaiah McDuffie did last year. And then he finally did get that full-time role, and it was nice to see it finally come to fruition. That's why I mentioned earlier with Zaire Franklin and I know Zaire was kind of battling injuries, I think, a little bit at the end of the season. But when EJ Speed got the full-time role, Zaire's numbers dipped a little bit. But then they ended up shoring up, I think, in the last couple of games of the season. So I think in all honesty, we've seen Zaire and Bobby Okereke each go for like 130 tackles or more on the same team. So I don't see why EJ Speed couldn't replicate the same kind of production that Bobby Okereke did a couple of years ago. So again, he's another one that I would probably bump up here with these guys in tier 4. And not to mention earlier, Kaiser White's kind of a sleeper too. I think he's fairly ranked here. I just see him kind of get drafted probably a lot lower than where they have him ranked here. But he's kind of a guy that a lot of people I think are scared of just due to injury that has, all the potential green dot, snaps and just production, proven production. So kind of a guy that could jump up. So there's a few for me, just kind of right off the rip. Do you have anybody that you like collecting in your dynasty leagues or picking up later in your drafts that you think are going to outproduce their ADP?
Yeah, I'm going to be a homer again, and I'm going to stick with this Jeff Hafley defense, and I think he's going to be pretty good. And I'm going to say Quay Walker. We know he's an elite athlete. We've seen some, $1 million body, maybe a 10-cent head. I think it sounds like the light is starting to come on. The practice reports from training camp have been really promising. He's been playing really well. They gave him the green dot, which was something I didn't think they were going to do with Xavier McKinney coming in. I thought that would be the guy that they would just give the green dot to. It didn't seem like Walker was a guy who could kind of run a defense, but obviously they trust him. It sounds like they're just letting him run, and that's what you want to do with a guy like that, right? Don't make him be a take-on linebacker. Just let him run and chase. Use that athleticism. I mean, he's a supreme athlete. And we've seen some like really high, huge tackle games from him. So I think, and especially, Hafley's talked about wanting his defensive linemen to kind of be penetrators instead of like holding up linemen. So I think that's going to give him even more opportunities for tackles. So I think this could be his real breakout year. Edgerrin Cooper's coming in, and another guy I like quite a bit, but he's not been running with the ones. It's been Walker and McDuffie, who you just mentioned. I think Cooper got banged up today. We'll see how serious it is. We haven't gotten any real indication, but he did have to leave practice. So I think that's even more indicative of a Walker breakout. So he's a guy I think could have. There's a potential monster season in there if he can kind of harness that athleticism and kind of get some instincts and just. I think this is a defense that's going to play to his strengths much more than the Joe Barry defense did.
I totally agree. And hearing you say kind of things that you've heard out of training camp and stuff kind of gives me a little bit more confidence in him, because I've kind of been worried. And like you mentioned, I've seen those huge 17 tackle games, and I've seen the production and the ceiling that Quay Walker can produce, but I always worry if maybe he needs to mature and how long that could take in a player like him, because some guys don't ever mature. Some guys take a couple of years, what kind of player is he going to be? So that's kind of what worried me. And it seemed like after how last year ended, that maybe it was going to be that I imagine him and Isaiah McDuffie would start the season, but it was going to be a matter of Edge Cooper is right there, and he's waiting to take whichever one of these linebackers wants to slip up, right? And to me, Isaiah McDuffie was just far more consistent last year in the time that he got all the snaps. And I think that was probably going to weigh into how they treated this year, if things remain the same off the field and with Quay's attitude. So hearing you say that kind of sounds to me like maybe Quay has matured and that the team is kind of, leaning into that and, seeing him turn that leaf and really giving him the reins to the defense. And that makes me feel good about that, because, and not so much about Edge Cooper, because, honestly, in a lot of the IDP best balls I'm in, Edge Cooper goes before Isaiah McDuffie. And please, everybody, make no mistake, you're not going to see a rookie linebacker start over a proven vet who already knows the defense. I mean, I don't care what kind of round that unless they're just like a 101 overall, which you really don't see all that often. You're not going to see Edge Cooper come in and supplant Isaiah McDuffie unless he just flat out falls on his face. I mean, at least to start the season, it's going to be Isaiah McDuffie's position, and Quay Walker and Isaiah McDuffie are going to man this linebacking core. But I mean, I'm not saying that Edge Cooper isn't a good person to have on your team, because as a hold, again, once if both of them produce, worst case scenario, Edge Cooper's coming out to be a stud in this defense as soon as next year. But in best case scenario, Quay loses his head or Isaiah McDuffie slips up in a few games, he'll be right in there too. So I think this kind of just more or less solidifies the Quay Walker and Isaiah McDuffie kind of linebackers kind of manning the core of this Green Bay defense, and Edge Cooper is just going to have to wait until opportunity arises. But I imagine he'll probably get a little bit of run, but I think he's just going to have to wait until, like I said, somebody slips up or, something kind of happens to the guys in front of him.
Yeah, Cooper was one of my favorite prospects in the draft, and I love that they got him. But people need to remember that McDuffie played for Jeff Hafley at BC when he was in college, so he knows the system. He was Hafley said that McDuffie was one of his favorite players, so he's going to get run definitely in base sets. We'll see. I don't know. He's not great in coverage, so whether he comes out and maybe Cooper comes in nickel,
Sure.
We'll see, because Cooper's a really good blitzer, and he's got that great length. He's got that great arm length, and he can really probably be someone who could be a weapon covering tight ends. But we'll have to see how that shakes out. But I think Quay Walker's going to be the one guy that we know is going to be on the field for 3 downs.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So we mentioned it earlier. You talked about Quincy Wilson. Any players that you like better in best ball, big plays type scoring than in your typical tackle heavy scoring formats?
Linebackers wise?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. Yeah, you're tackling or you're sacking linebackers. You're probably looking more at like your Ernest Jones, Bobby Okereke will sprinkle in a couple here and there. Bobby Wagner will once in a while. Not really. He's not a guy you're really looking at for sacks. You just kind of happen upon those. Levante David's a great one that in tier 3 that could jump up. And like I said, with more opportunity this year with Devin White being gone, I think that just lends well to Levante David maybe getting behind the line and getting some tackles for loss and some extra sacks this year. I think he can bump up from 4.5 in 2023. Let's see. I'll go back over here to last year's finishers. Let's see.
One guy I'll mention while you're looking is that I like in best ball is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who has some really big games, but then has some just complete zero games. So even maybe not because of the big play scoring, but just as a best ball kind of guy, just like he's kind of the defensive equivalent of like a Gabe Davis, Christian Watson, something like that, because he can have a monster game and then he can just completely disappear. So he's someone I would much prefer. Like if you're in a best ball format, he's someone I would kind of kick up my rankings.
Now, if you, let's just see. Yeah, if you check out the second half of his season, you'll notice about week 10 on, he just lit it up. There's only 2 games he had less than 10 points in FantasyPros Scoring. And from what I understand now, I'm no insider, I'm no beat writer, I'm no person on the Browns organization, but I've heard a lot about the defensive coordinator and coaches trying to figure out where JOK works best in this defense. And I think during that stretch is when you saw the lights click. I think maybe they were trying to use him in the wrong way, and more when they switched. I can't exactly tell you the exact difference in how they played him, but I know that they used him in a specific way, more as a Swiss Army knife because the guy is honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's great in about a great PFF grader in most areas. And I would argue he's great at defending the pass, and I'm pretty sure that's kind of when they had him in coverage as well. He would get a few passes defended, even an interception or 2 later in the year. But then they had him rushing the passer too. So I think he's he's pretty well rounded, and I think they kind of figured out that sweet spot in his role within this defense. And they had who is it? I forget who their one was. Walker Anthony. Is that right? Walker was that? Is that who it was last year? Their LB1.
Anthony Walker.
Yeah. He was kind of more of the run stuffer, and then JOK would just kind of float around and rush the passer, play in coverage and stuff like that. And I think that's more how it's going to be this year. I think they figured out and kind of. I don't want to say that it's going to be that you're going to see like this year be a replicate of like the second half of his season last year, but I think you're going to see him play in more of those packages and more of the style and role that he did towards the end of the season. So I think we're going to see more of these boom weeks from JOK, and we're not going to see as much inconsistency in the down weeks. So I think we're going to see a little bit better floor from JOK this year. And like I said, I've heard reports and I've heard all kinds of people on podcasts I've listened to talk about how this defensive coaching staff is just feeling really good about kind of what they figured out in JOK. So I really love that one.
Yeah. Anybody else you got that you want to mention real quick?
Let's see here. Just kind of scrolling down my list. Stats. Come on. Head points. Player finishes 2023. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, yeah. Roquan Smith's definitely going to finish. He ought to finish higher than where he did last year. I think I'm looking at here. He was maybe barely an LB1 in terms of just fantasy points. That's going to bump up. I think that's mainly more heavily weighed on assisted tackles versus solo tackles. If you go look at his numbers last year, they were pretty even, whereas historically he's kind of more of a solo tackle guy, just generally speaking. Demario Davis is another guy that will get you 5+ sacks in a season. He's an old guy, but on your contending rosters, even starting like 2 linebackers or in like 6 IDPs, he's pretty relevant. Somebody that's not going to cost you very much, but has that sack upside and it's going to get you 6-7+ tackles a game. Frankie Louvu is another one that's going to be rushing the passer this year. I imagine next to Bobby Wagner, he's probably not going to be that set in the middle, soak up all the runs. He's going to get his tackles, but he's going to be rushing the passer as well. So another guy that just kind of has that sack upside, like we were talking about.
Yeah, I like that call. Yeah, because you're exactly right. I think Bobby Wagner's probably going to be the middle of the field guy, and they'll probably let Louvu kind of run, do some more blitzing and stuff like that. I think that's a good call.
Yeah. Caden Ellis, I've seen a lot of hype about him. The defensive coaching staff really likes him and trusts him with the green dot. And I don't think, from what I understand in training camp, he hasn't come off the field in any kind of packages. So they really like him being on the field all the time. And he's another one of those guys that has historically rushed the passer, and he'll get you a sack every few games or so. So if he can maybe put a little bit more upside to his game this year, you could be looking at a guy who jumps up maybe even a couple of tiers. Then let's see. I like Juwan Bentley. New England gets a new defensive coordinator. Bill Belichick's finally gone. So I'm kind of excited to see who emerges from New England in terms of just really all over the field, because this team is historically for the last 20 years in IDP leagues has been a thorn in your side, man. You don't want to roster any New England players because they rotate at every level of the defense, which is why they're so good. But for IDP, it's annoying. So I'm excited.
Their IDP is just like their running backs.
I swear. Yeah. So I'm excited to see kind of who, like what might change. I've heard that Mayo wants to keep things for the same for the most part, but I think that I think you'll see some changes, and you'll probably see some players emerge in more full-time roles. And I think Bentley's going to be one of those guys who's on the field more and maybe in more consistent roles versus just kind of floating around and not really, just kind of having boom weeks. So I think we'll kind of see a floor develop for some of these guys, maybe on the defensive line and in the linebacking core. So he's also kind of a sneaky one that I've been picking up here and there. And for the most part, that's kind of it. I mean, Eric Kendricks is a guy that's kind of a value. He's going to be in a full time right in the middle of the Dallas defense, who's lost a lot of juice this offseason. They've lost Sam Williams. They've lost, I think, Leighton Vander Esch retired. Not that they were just star-studded individuals, but, there's a lot of holes. So even being 33, I think Eric Kendricks ought to have a good 120-plus tackles this season. He'd be pretty reliable. So just a few guys.
Reunited with Mike Zimmer, too.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you're right.
Reunited with Mike Zimmer, too, yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that does it for our look at the linebackers. We'll be back next week to talk about the defensive backs. But, Axe, thanks for joining me. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, you can find me. I just changed my Twitter handle to Axeman IDP. A lot of people call me Axeman, so I just have been trying to kind of figure out how I can rebrand of sorts and kind of change my handle for a while. So I just figured I'd go with it, and I've been diving into IDP quite a bit. So you can find me there on Twitter, or I'll be hopping on the IDP Plus Bets YouTube this season with a show kind of like you're finding here. Johnny and I will be doing a tackle prop show each week, and that'll be a lot of fun. So you kind of have some things to look forward to with IDP Plus and the Bets channel. So go ahead and follow that and stay up to date with all your good betting content, because we got some good lineups coming. So that's where you can find me. Otherwise, I'm mostly doing behind the scenes stuff, cutting shorts and kind of helping out where I can with IDP Plus community. So yeah, not much other than that. Hopping on podcast.
Yeah, we've got a ton of cool stuff coming with the IDP bets. So like, subscribe, get all your notifications, because there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. But that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.